Thank you so much for coming in. First of all, it's wonderful to see a house full for nature-based solutions, which is really, really awesome. What we've agreed as panelists is we're going to try and tell you two words, which is our first name, our last name, the names of our organizations following that, and then just answer why are nature-based solutions important is how we're going to start it off. There's some questions that we have where we'll try and foster a conversation. We'll keep time at the end for audience feedback, etc. Along the way, if there's something pressing, just please raise your hand or find some way of attracting attention. Let's keep this conversational rather than gyan from one side to the other. Does that sound all right? Okay.
Yeah, can you hear me? So I'm Amogh. I come from an organization called SELCO, which was started in 1995. Basically works on access to basic energy, where we see that it can catalyze and bring value to education, health, livelihoods, and financial inclusion. And now with climate change, we are looking how we can collaborate and look at finding nature-based solutions to finally impact the rural, poor, underserved.
My name is Shloka Nath, and I lead an organization called the India Climate Collaborative. We were set up to build the space of climate philanthropy in India, and CSR is a big focus for us. And one of the things that we've launched at this conference is something called the Climate Solutions Platform, where we're showcasing CSOs and their work for CSRs to ensure that we sort of drive more funding towards climate action in India. Nature-based solutions are a big focus for us, and we can talk about that next.
Hisham Mundol, I'm with the Environmental Defense Fund. We are a not-for-profit that works in the space of the environment. Our approach in India is to be a catalyst for an Indian pathway to shared sustainable prosperity. At the heart of that is in everything that we do, whether it's farming or fisheries or agriculture, it is incomes and livelihoods led before anything else. And that's why nature-based solutions are so critical to us, because nature-based solutions, there is the designing based on principles of nature, but equally critical is that stakeholders on the ground get the benefits of this, including improved livelihoods.
Thanks. I'm Abhijit Zacharia. So I'm with Mindtree Ltd. Mindtree is, as many of you might know, is an IT services company, just like Infosys, Wipro, and many others. And essentially, we look at digital transformation and technology enablement for most of our customers. But in the context of sustainability, Mindtree has been on our path to sustainability, whether it's through our internal decarbonization plans or through our CSR initiatives. We've been on that journey for the last 10 years plus, and we do look at nature-based solutions in particular, something that we want to kind of focus on. And I guess from the discussions in this panel, we will unpack a lot of things in terms of how much more there is for corporates to understand about nature-based solutions, and we can talk a little bit about our perspective too.
Thanks. I should have done this just earlier, but can I just have a show of hands? Who are from NGOs implementing on the ground? Okay, if you could put your hands down. Who are from corporates looking at funding CSR? So there's two people who are going to be hounded, 3 people who will be hounded, 4 people who will be hounded at the end. Which of you are relatively familiar with nature-based solutions? Okay, so it's a balance. In 2 or 3 words, can someone just tell us what you're looking for in this panel? What would you like to get? Anybody?
Probably adding value to whatever we have.
Okay, adding value to existing whatever we have. Anyone else? Challenges, okay. Okay, the triple win. Animals, people, and planet, okay. Tech-based solution, okay. Cool, all right, thank you. Let's get this going then. Shloka, I'm going to ask the first question to you. At the ICC, you have, in a sense, a unique perspective of being able to speak to a wide range of corporates, wide range of civil society organizations, wide range of funders. What are you seeing as far as nature-based solutions are concerned? Is there growing traction, understanding, momentum, or not?
I mean, there definitely is. Let me just start by sort of emphasizing why it's even important, because when we talk about climate, so often we get into sort of the carbon emissions, technicalities side. Let's be clear, you know, climate is also about sustaining life, and nature and nature-based solutions speak directly to that mission. It is an ecosystem set, or rather an ecosystem-driven set of solutions. And so when we talk about nature, it doesn't mean a single battery, a single, you know, EV solution, etc. You're really talking about how you intervene within systems. The reason it's also important is, I think, threefold. One is its focus on communities. That's something we really, really believe in at the ICC. Nature-based solutions speak directly to livelihoods and livelihood generation, you know, rural economies, etc. The second aspect is, of course, resilience. And I don't think we're talking about that enough. COP27 is focusing on that, you know, in a major way this year, and it's something that really needs to come back to the forefront. Climate is not a future problem. It's here right now, and we have to adapt to that. Adaptation and mitigation are not a binary. If you do not mitigate, you will be adapting forever. And you have to adapt now in the sense that you also need to ensure that your adaptation solutions include mitigation. And I think nature-based solutions are the perfect example of how you can speak to those sort of twin priorities when it comes to solving for climate change. I think the third piece I would talk about is biodiversity, right? It's also a critical component of nature-based solutions and something we have to keep in mind. It's probably the only set of solutions that speak to natural resources and why that's incredibly important to preserve and restore. So with that background, you've asked me like the mother of all questions, so I'm going to try and answer it. I'm so tempted to hand this back to you, Hisham, and just say, what do you think? But I think, again, coming back to the ecosystem solution perspective, I think there are many aspects from local ecology, biodiversity protection, etc., in terms of different benefits. But I think if I had to break it down, I'm going to sort of choose 3 or 4 critical actors, right? One is the public sector. The public sector funds in nature-based solutions actually form the largest chunk of the pie. So you have either budgetary allocation right now or non-budgetary funds. And if you talk about non-budgetary funds, you're looking at you know, a lot of nature-based initiatives that are undertaken by NGOs, you know, private companies, etc. Public funds really are a lot of government agencies who've put in funding right now into sort of nature-based schemes. So you have, for instance, 2 major missions. You've got the National Action Plan on Climate Change. You have the Green India Mission. You have the National Mission for Sustainable Agriculture, which is a major one that's come up as well. And you have the National Adaptation Fund on Climate Change. So these are massive public schemes. The second major player is, of course, corporations. And that's why we're here today, right? CSR, of course, spend on environment is actually growing massively since 2014 and 2015. How much of that is going towards like nature-based solutions or even climate, we can't really sort of ascertain right now. But we do know that with the rise of net zero declarations, with government sort of ambition increasing, CSR spending on this sector has actually increased by 110% since 2014 and 2015. At the same time, you have business operations, which is another key component of sort of how corporations are looking at nature-based solutions. So, for instance, you have 24 private sector companies in India right now that have committed towards net zero targets. But they need to sort of think about the commitments in terms of how they are looking at reinventing their supply chains. So that's going to be another major actor or key component. And there is, again, you know, major momentum on this, and we can talk about it in terms of how, you know, businesses are prioritizing sort of sustainable or locally sourced solutions. I think both my colleagues here, Abhijit, you can probably speak to this very well. The final, and I'll pause here after this, is of course the philanthropic component. And I think that's really, really important because this is the seed or source of capital, and this speaks to all of you here in terms of what CSR funding can do. It can be really catalytic. It can unlock much larger pools of capital towards nature-based solutions, and we can talk about this also in detail, but just so you know that philanthropic giving, especially towards nature-based solutions, is also on the rise here in India. And we are seeing that this is going to be a major sort of potential mover going forward when it comes to nature-based solutions. So I'll pause here, just a very quick overview, but happy to jump in more detail.
Sure, thanks. And just 2 things that I took from a lot of insights there. One is from an NGO's perspective, as you're putting in funding proposals, corporates, both for CSR as well as ESG activities, love to see leverage. And as much as possible, if you can show how it aligns with some of the big government programs that are out there, you're going to be able to leverage both rupees as well as momentum. And the real prize is if we are able to think beyond CSR and think of ESG. Shloka spoke about those net zero commitments. Corporates are looking for proposals where you're able to tangibly help them get to net zero, and nature-based solutions are going to be an integral but difficult part of how you get there. It's easier to say I'm going to fix something in my energy mix than it is to do a long-standing nature-based solution. Abhijit, I'm going to move to you and Mindtree, and Akanksha, welcome. We did introductions. Because you were 30 seconds late, we're passing all the difficult questions to you. No, we're kidding. Abhijit, on an organization like Mindtree, you're relatively progressive in terms of the work that you're doing on CSR and ESG. How do you think of nature-based solutions, which sometimes, sounds like a tree-hugging NGO wala agenda? How does a corporate like you look at nature-based solutions?
Yeah, thanks. So, I think one thing, we can all agree on, irrespective of who we represent, whether it's civil society or corporates, is that, the duress that has been building over time, both in local communities, local ecosystems, as well as in cities, urban centers, is going to fast outpace our ability to respond. And I think that's quite clear. It's evident with everything that you've been seeing over the last 3-4 years, And corporates are in a prime position to be able to kind of move the needle, right? And I think referring to what Shloka had said, private capital and private philanthropic capital, there's a dire need for that, to be kind of infused into things like nature-based solutions. Now, from a corporate point, I wouldn't say corporate CSR, from a corporate sustainability point of view, which includes CSR and our own internal decarbonization journey, which looks at terms that you might or might not be familiar with, which things like Scope 1 inventory, Scope 2, which is looking at your own emissions within the company, within the fence, what we call within the fence, then looking at Scope 2, which is purchased energy, and looking at Scope 3, which is emissions that you don't have direct control over, right? So right now the corporates are laser focused, majority of the corporates is on that, and is on internal decarbonization. Now, can you build NBS into your internal decarbonization journey? Now, that's a tricky question. It's possible, for example, with manufacturing companies or a beverage company, right? Many of your stakeholders that you work with as a part of your production, I'm not talking about CSR, as a part of your production could be farmers, for example, or a potato chips company, or Lay's. I mean, they'll have farmers growing potatoes, right, in different parts of the country, different parts of the world. Now, can you work on building regenerative sustainable regenerative agriculture, agroforestry, or sustainable livelihood program with those stakeholders, which means it's built into your internal value chain. Now, CSR is different. CSR is CSR is outside your value chain, right? Now, you're looking at interventions in communities. That's very different from this. Now, that is where I think corporates, Mindtree also, I must admit, is new to NBS as a term, right? So NBS is relatively nascent in one sense, but I think many of the initiatives a lot of us do, whether it is people could be working on afforestation, people could be working on integrated watershed development programs. That's something that we do in Nanjangud and 2 districts in Mysore. So we're looking at livelihoods and of course water conservation and various other things, right? Now, but we haven't tagged it as NBS, right? Now it could be NBS, but I think if you want to understand impact, you want to be able to assess your impact, we would ideally, and I would speak for other corporates, we would need some kind of a common understanding of NBS that we currently don't have, right? Some kind of framework. What are the first principles of NBS, which could include livelihoods, could include consent, justice, equity, so many things, right? So I think corporates are led to, I think they could misunderstand NBS, and I think that is happening in a big way right now. So I would say that it's time for a lot of more cross-sharing and experiences, so that as corporates we understand what to do the right thing when we say we want to work in environment. So yeah.
Thanks so much for that. One thing to just keep in mind is the term internal value chain. CSR is important. Of course, we should be talking to corporates on CSR, but if you are somehow able to embed yourself in the internal value chain, you just open up a whole new dimension of relationship. And from a corporate's point of view, reach out to partners in civil society to help you improve that internal value chain, because there are skills and capabilities that they have which you might not naturally be able to access. Akanksha, can I bring you in here, and you know, we did the round of introductions, so please do introduce yourself. But also, one of the challenges of nature-based solutions is how do you do it at scale? It's easy, in a sense, to do something at a small pilot level, but unfortunately, a small pilot level isn't going to make enough of a difference for the country or the planet. How, from your experience at Sterlite, are you able to do programs at scale which hopefully last and deliver numbers to tens of thousands rather than hundreds?
Sure. First of all, thank you, and apologies for being a bit late. I look after the global portfolio of sustainability and social impact for Sterlite Technologies. Coming to your question, impact at scale, I think it's really essential to look at nature-based solutions also in a very holistic way. In the sense, what we are trying to do at STL is, see, when we talk about business sustainability, it is not just limited to one company or one industry, but how do we take the entire ecosystem together? Even if we talk about simple things like waste and water management. So one thing that we are trying to do is, if I talk about water, is taken a very aggressive goal for water positivity, which also includes not just how do we manage our water as a resource internally across the value chain into the business in terms of reusing, recycling and all of that, but how do we also take the community along? For this, we have partnered with the World Bank Water Group and created a sort of community structure for groundwater recharge, creating green cover, creating livelihood through water-based resources optimization, and many things together weaved into one platform, which is what we call nature-based solutions, wherein the community and the industry can work together in a collaborative way. So I think to answer your question precisely, that how can we scale the solutions on this, I think collaboration is definitely one of the key things that we need to look at, wherein the businesses and the community work on nature-based solutions, also innovate more, not just on the implementation part, but also on the financing needs. Could there be better models where, you know, the benefit directly reaches out to the community and the businesses also get an opportunity to work together?
Just if I could add a small follow-on. So this platform that you spoke about, is it already integrated to, or could it integrate with something that the government is doing around Jal Mission, for example? Is that how you would get additional scale, for instance?
Yes, government is already a partner for it. So the Jal Shakti Ministry is partner to it, the World Bank overall mission, and they are also inviting industry support. So others also, those who are interested on nature-based solutions, particularly on water, are happy to, they should join this.
Sure. And just remember, it's about water conservation, it's about water recycling, but there's also the element of incomes and livelihoods. And that's actually what keeps some of these initiatives alive beyond a funding project over a short period of time. Amogh, if I can, we've been talking about the government in 2 or 3 questions now, and quite frankly, within corporates, there's a little bit of sometimes skepticism, sometimes worse than skepticism about how do we work with the government. Why don't we just do our own thing and just get on with it rather than having to navigate government? We know that they are essential partner, but we also know that the corporate community and the government community don't hang out particularly well. Can they hang out?
Thanks, Hisham, for the question. So before I come to your question, let us discuss about what problem are we facing. I mentioned that SELCO's work is for the poor communities, economically poor, to be mentioning, and underserved. So I mentioned in one of my data saying that even today, in 2022, more than 50% schools in India, in some of the districts, do not have electrical connection. There's no electrical connection at all. Even today, how many times in newspapers have you seen that in delivery rooms, there was a mishap because there is no electricity? And so SELCO's relation to NBS is what we are harnessing the sun, the power of the sun. And so taking this data, I was just mentioning, Abhijit, that the wastage of food of vegetables and fruits that we have in India is equivalent to what UK consumes. It's 90% of what UK consumes is our wastage. So the problem that we're talking right now is how do we look at it at scale? And so when it's come to scale is where the government is actually relevant. During COVID, what SELCO decided with its partners is that we are going to look at 10 districts and we are going to completely blanket the health centers, because during COVID, people are talking about ventilators and all of those things, but in the isolation centers, let me tell you, it is very cold at 10 degrees, 12 degrees Celsius, but there are no water heating solutions. That is where solar water heater comes into picture. There are no lights, there are not fans. How do you expect, in summer in a COVID isolation centers at 45 degrees, 46 degrees, patients to live because there is no fan? That is the real problem that we are talking right now in India. I'm sure that in this room, people are also following at what is happening at the COP. And of course, there's a lot of discussion about climate there. But in India, what we have to do right now is, if NGOs have to work at scale, you will have to take the corporate grant and use it to unlock. What Shloka was mentioning just before, and what Karthik from Tata Trust was mentioning in the panel, is that SELCO, what they're trying to do is that we use at max, say 50% of the corporate grant, and try and show it to the government, saying that, you see, I have got private philanthropy, I've got corporate, I've got this big name. Why can't you give some of your convergence schemes? Why can't we do that? And SELCO has actually tried to do it in some of the districts in Karnataka, even in Bihar. Even in Bihar, we could go and talk to the health ministry, to the district administration in the aspirational district of Muzaffarpur. We told them, you see, we have got this corpus fund, we want to do certain project, but we only will do it if you come in with some stakeholding. And that's what we are actually talking about. And I'll come to the income, because income is very, very important. So corporate funds can be used to unlock the government schemes. And with respect to livelihoods, what we are trying to say is that, can we unlock bank financing? I'm appalled. You see, this RBI's priority lending sector is there, which says that livelihood, agriculture, and solar all are priority lending sector. But even though nobody is looking at it, the solutions I'm trying to tell about is not big solar power plants. They basically are very small solutions for the marginalized farmers. And that is where CSR can look, of course, there are a lot of jargon going on and the ESG is going on. I was just telling Abhijit that we empathize with you, but the problem in India is very different. Come on, let us go to the field and look at it. And that is where the scale is really required. And we can only scale with the government. And so I'll end with this, saying that the corporate CSR, why it is important is to innovate the way we, in not only the technology, but also the delivery solutions, how it goes to last mile and how it can be used for long-term, as a long-term solution. I'll pause here.
Can I ask a follow-on on that one? When you spoke about unlocking government financing, and I know for some of you it might be a little elementary, but can you just give an illustration of what that actually means as an example?
So we see a lot of STEM people here, and they are looking at education content. How beautiful, congratulations to all of it. But when you go to the government schools, the content don't run. You know why? Because the TV is not running because there's no electricity. And so what we were saying is that we are going to say that we are not going to talk about solar. No, solar is not the solution. The solution is delivery of content. And that can happen only if you give at least a 6 hours power backup to them. It's a very easy solution, right? So in 2013, SELCO started doing this, solar-powered smart class solution, and we partnered with some of these e-content partners, and then we started looking at schools. Initially, we got a funder who said that the match granting something. They said, okay, I will give you 50%, get it somewhere from the 50% from the schools. We said, okay. We started for 2-3 years, and we got some good response from the communities. But you would be delighted to know that during elections, a lot of these MLAs came to us. A lot of these MP-led funds came to us, and they said, we have got some funds lying. Can you do this for us? And they said, okay, but not for you for 50%. You'll have to put in 80%. My corporate funder or the CSR will give only 20%. And in some cases, believe me, further in 2018-19, we actually got a PSU calling us and see that we have a CSR and we want to do it for free, completely. And that's how we unlocked the finance over the period of 7 to 8 years. We could do it in education because CSR education was a buzzword there, but now what we want to do is with livelihoods. especially solar-based small livelihood, decentralized livelihood solutions.
Right. Well, thanks for that. Abhijit, I'm going to move back to you. In all of the conversations we've been having about nature-based solutions, one thing that's there is that it could be really complicated. There's the nature inputs part of it, there's the sustainability part of it, there's the livelihoods part of it. Sometimes you hear of nature-based, you hear of solutions like I planted 1 lakh trees. My view is that's really tragic because most of the 1 lakh trees will die eventually unless you think about what keeps trees alive and the community, etc. But from a corporate point of view, how do you measure impact for nature-based solutions, given everything that we're trying to grapple with?
Yeah. Thanks, Hisham. That's a really pertinent question. And it is something that I think everyone's trying to grapple with. I think, but before that, one is to also, I think for corporates and frankly all of us, to kind of understand how do we define NBS, right? So I think in common imagination, NBS, most people you asked is essentially kind of, they focus on forests, right? As carbon storage kind of sinks, right? So forests, whether it's protection, rejuvenation, and kind of restoration, right? Of forest and ecosystem restoration. I mean, they're not so focused on, I mean, so one is that do we broaden our understanding of what falls under the NBS umbrella? Does it include green infrastructure like solar? Does it include urban infrastructure that is sustainable? Does it include biomimicry in architecture and things like that? So what is NBS, right? So I think that's one, and because right now the focus is afforestation or landscape restoration or ecosystem restoration, right? And I think at least corporates, that is most corporates, that is their understanding of NBS. I think that somewhere needs to be perhaps set right. The second thing is that measuring impact. I mean, okay, I'll just give you an example of our own integrated watershed development program that we started, because environment was actually in CSR a very new domain in Mindtree. It's not, though we have worked on an internal decarbonization, as a community intervention, it started only just barely a year ago, right? And where we're looking at kind of recharging the deep water aquifers in that district, looking at strategically working with the right partner is important, because a lot of people who come to you as corporates with these planting programs, right, where you tag it to employee engagement and birthdays and work anniversaries and that is the trend. And the danger is that without taking into consideration the first principles of NBS, the way it should be kind of undertaken, which is looking at, the land acquisition process, did you take the community into, did you take their consent? Do you even need green cover there? Now, in India, a big problem that, researchers at A3 and NCBS and many other places, right, they talk about this. They said that in India, because of this historical way that Britishers have looked at grasslands, right? So people see grasslands, and I'm talking about government projects and corporates, they see grasslands and they think that this is degraded land, it needs green cover. So they plant, irrespective of what the groundwater level is, irrespective of whether that's appropriate for that landscape at all. And I think this is where there's corporates, they need to tread with caution, pick the right partners, NGO partners to work with, and in terms of impact. So we have in our project, we have identified certain impact that we would like to see, right? I mean, so groundwater table rising by an X number of feet, at least 95 out of the 200 families to be practicing regenerative agriculture as these model families. We're looking at X number of cattle tanks, ponds, the revival of the soil quality, improved agricultural production. So there are a lot of things, right? But there's nothing special here. I mean, these are standard parameters, standard ways to assess any watershed development program or any other program for that matter. Is there an NBS framework? And at least I'm not aware of it. I'm sure maybe others can shed light on it. But I think corporates would benefit from a framework which allows us to assess it from an NBS lens, which includes community buy-in and all these things, right? And not just that the water level has risen by 30 feet. So I think that is where we stand as an organization. We want to learn more. We do have projects that fall under the overall definition of NBS, but we would like to understand more, and I hope that other corporates also kind of begin to understand this.
I'm going to come to the NGO side for a moment, but just one thing that's clear about what the indicator should not be for NBS is number of trees. That is just one input part of it. It doesn't talk about biodiversity. It doesn't talk about, the local community. It doesn't talk about anything else apart from number of trees. So both NGOs and corporates, please, when you're looking at making proposals or granting out proposals, try and identify a level of nuance beyond a number of trees. And wherever you hear of anyone planting just a number of trees, ask them to pause and layer on the additional material. Shloka, from an NGO's point of view, what can NGOs do to make life simpler or easier for corporates like Mindtree? Because I know, Abhijit, you've spoken from a Mindtree context, but I can imagine that that's a typical issue across corporates, and sometimes we in the NGO space don't make our own lives easier by overcomplicating or oversimplifying matters.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you said that. So Abhijit, I think you made a couple of brilliant points, which I'll address right now, and something you said earlier about the definition of NBS also, which I think is very relevant. And Amogh, I think you explained unlocking capital brilliantly, so thank you for doing all of our jobs on this panel. But to your point on sort of NBS, look, I think NBS is not a new concept. Something that we'd love to do in the climate community is we're gatekeepers of climate change. We're like doctors or, finance people. We just come up with our own jargon and our own language, and only we understand it. Nature-based solutions have been around for centuries. Communities have been implementing these solutions. The wisdom that they have in terms of understanding is something that we can learn from. Today, you will hear natural solutions. You will hear ecosystem engineering. There's ecosystem-based restoration solutions. All of this is jargon for the same thing. But what that has meant is that demystifying, therefore, how you approach nature-based solutions is therefore hard. It's vague, it's nebulous, it's difficult for us to sort of understand. And I think that leads to a certain set of complications. So what can NGOs do? I think one is demystify what those NBS solutions are by starting to map solutions across the country. So one of the things that we've done is we've supported the Council on Energy, Environment and Water, CEW, to actually map these solutions across the country. And they've discovered that communities across this country, surprise, surprise, are already implementing a whole host of community-based, nature-based solutions. And actually, we're not really aware of what those are, and therefore not taking them to scale across the country, and therefore not funding them or using it as a means to unlock greater pools of capital, because we're just not aware of what exists out there. So step one is let's start mapping what is actually out there across this country, and there are organizations and initiatives who are doing this work. The second aspect, of course, is what you just mentioned, Abhijit, the need to standardize, monitor NBS in terms of its actual impacts. Now, there is the need to create effective indicators. There are also indicators which already exist in terms of frameworks, but we need to implement them here in India. So in terms of indicators we need to create, here's the challenge, right? We don't actually understand how to measure the effectiveness of nature-based solutions. I think that's something that we as a climate community are still grappling with. We don't know how to measure the impacts in terms of co-benefits. So what are the related sort of set of indicators that we need to come up with? Hisham, you hit the nail on the head. It's not about the number of trees you've planted. It's about the livelihood generation or income generation you're providing for those communities, because you're thinking about agroforestry, not because you're thinking about how many trees that you've planted. So I think it's about templatizing not just the list of indicators, but what are good climate solutions versus not so good climate solutions. We have to get better about that as a community. So that's a big sort of, I think, move that needs to happen. We do need to adapt IUCN's global standard for NBS to the India context. That is the framework that needs to work here. And that is, for those of you who don't know, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, or IUCN, actually has a global standard. It has a set of 8 criteria and 27 indicators that defines what is a successful and sustainable set of nature-based solutions. We have to contextualize this for India. It has not been done as yet, but that is the framework to adopt and take forward. It is going to allow us to apply ourselves, to learn continuously, and to make it an iterative process, because these frameworks are not set in stone. We're all learning and trying to sort of adapt and move forward. So I think that's going to be something that I think will actually hopefully change things and be an imperative.
And just an added part of it, as corporates, if you all get together and, arrive at a common set of questions that you ask NGOs, that usually helps. As, in a sense, a buyer of a service, you have a negotiating position that you say, hey, listen, I want all the NBS solutions to start, giving me pointers on a certain set of specific criteria that I lay out. Amogh, I'm going to move to you and ask you, first of all, from within a limited amount of CSR budget or a limited amount of ESG bandwidth in a corporation, you can make the case for health and education, and both of those sectors are important. How do you make the case for climate change? And on top of that, how do you make the case for nature-based solutions to a hard-nosed CFO who's asking you, what am I going to get out of this?
Sure. So I'm going to come to climate last and income first. So there are 4 aspects to it. The criticality of the solution. I mentioned that during COVID, it was so in an aspirational district of Raichur, what we could do is that we could show it to the government that the expenditure of the exchequer on the diesel generators that they were using in times when there was no electricity in the PHCs has come down by 22%. And over a period of 5 years, or either over a period of 6 to 7 years, they will, whatever that investment that they would have done, which SELCO has done, they would have recovered it. And so it's sustainable because it's solar. That is, and critical because it's health center. That is the first place that, whenever you get in a rural place, you have a snake bite or a cough and cold, and that's where you go. That is the criticality of a solution. Second, of course, I told you about the savings. The actual amount of savings that you do that you could have otherwise spent on diesel-based generators. Third, on the business angle. So the solution that SELCO has over a period of years in Karnataka. In Karnataka, there is this, in the northern part of Karnataka, there is this thing that we all eat. This is roti. Roti is something which is hard, which can be used a period of 30 days, 45 days. It's not perishable as such. And so there is a lot of these women who are making rotis, handmade rotis. So we did a roti rolling machine, which by the way was solar powered. Now why solar powering? Because they would want to work in the night. Light is not there. They would want to work anytime that they want. So give them a battery-based solution. Now these women could make up to 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, even give jobs to the community members, up to 10, 12 such women coming together and then making rotis. And believe me, giving it to the Bangalore, northern part of Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, Andhra Pradesh, and making money. That is the economic part of it. By the way, it's solar. The third, there's this other solution that we have done, and of course I've spoken about it, about the proliferage and wastage of food, is about cold storages. I mean, there's a data which says that in India, 90% lagging behind. Only 10% of cold storages are there. So you find a FPO who has the data saying that, if I put up a cold storage and then I will give it for rent for so many farmers over a period of time, and then I'll recover that money, and that makes an economic sense to me while I am an entrepreneur and I am making money. And by the way, the cold storage is solar powered. That's the economic sense of it. Now what I'm trying to tell you is that cold storages, because it's solar powered, and even the roti rolling machines, they're a little expensive because there's a solar component to it. You know how many, over a period of time, you have seen, why did, iPhones, this is an example that we keep giving. iPhones, developing country, the most number of iPhones are sold in India. Do you know why? Because there is an economic sense to it. The banks are ready to give you loans. It's not iPhone who is selling, it's the banks who are selling the iPhones. And not the motorcycles or the automobile companies who are selling their products, it's the banks. Why isn't there a policy, from the banker's point of view, you're looking at giving solutions to the poor households? And that's where economic sense and scale comes into picture. You're looking at 60% of your country. And the fourth part of it is that, okay, by the way, you're doing all solar, so there is impact, there's a reduction of carbon footprints, and the sustainability. Doesn't that make solution? That doesn't make sense to anybody?
Thanks a lot for that. For anybody who is thinking of sending proposals to SELCO, remember the tagline, by the way, it's solar. And it's an important tagline because what you're trying to do is you want to talk about nature-based solutions, livelihoods, etc., but you're appealing to the core, philosophy of an organization. So you get both their hearts and minds. His email ID, I'm kidding. Akanksha, on the matter of finance, and I know Amogh touched about it in terms of, well, you spoke about banks, but I'm presuming most of it is public sector banks. But what are those sources of finances that might be there for nature-based solutions? Apart from obviously the large CSR funds of Sterlite, which you are going to unleash.
Of course. So I think broadly, as we understand, one is the capital generated from the project directly, which could be in the form of green bonds or impact funds. The other could be grants, and the CSR grants or the government funding. And we, Amogh spoke a lot about unlocking the government funds. And I couldn't agree with him more that, CSR grant should ideally be used as a catalyst for bringing in innovation, bringing in more capability into doing things in a better way. But then when it comes to scale, it has to be the government partnership. But when we talk about financing nature-based solution, I also want to talk about two important things. One is the impact and impact measurement indexes, defining the metrics in the right way, which could be measured so that people don't shy away from investing in nature-based solutions, because I think one of the biggest conservations for financing it is how do we fund these, because once the project will be invested in something which is not in my control or in our control, it would be very difficult to measure. And we have ample of examples when it comes to water, waste, afforestation, people plant trees, they die down, the poor management, climatic conditions, and many of those things. So I think defining a matrix is one thing, and second is coming together. So both at the district, state, as well as the private sector pull-in level. So how can organizations pull in funds together to collaborate and do it more, rather than doing exclusive stretch for about 1 kilometer and then not able to take care of it. So I think collaboration and impact measurement is one of the things which will unlock greater finances towards it.
And are there platforms right now for corporates? Like how does a neighbor or even a competitor of Sterlite know that Sterlite is doing X, Y, Z, and maybe if we partner together on this, what would the natural place be for them to begin? So
I think one of the key roles which maybe industry partners like CSR Box and others could do is create such kind of digital platforms which could list out. So earlier Ministry of Corporate Affairs has done some work, but I don't think it is updated to the level it should be. Also, one interesting thing, there are many startups and social enterprises coming up now. And they are coming up with solutions on retail investors, also giving an opportunity to invest in these nature-based solutions. So if there is a solar or a renewable energy project, along with the big corporate and government investments, can retail investors also, because there is a already signed deal with a client. So I think these solutions can also be explored when it comes to sustainable finance.
Thanks so much.